pushed back its IPO plans until 2027, adding to concerns about the company's financial position. So we wanted to speak with someone who has spent years studying the history of AI and who also believes that OpenAI could run out of money in the near future. Sebastian Mallaby is a prominent journalist, author, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And today, he's joining us to discuss what is next for OpenAI, what is next for the AI industry, and what investors should be watching. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I'd love to start with an article you wrote back in January that was titled, "This is what convinced me OpenAI will run out of money." And you said back then, quote, "My bet is that over the next 18 months, OpenAI runs out of money." We've been seeing a lot of red flags since then, the delaying of the IPO. Later, we saw this proposal for the US government to take a stake in the company. I guess I'll just start with, what do you make of the recent news, and do you hold to your prediction?
Yeah, I do hold to my prediction. Back in January, the burn rate was just crazy. So that although OpenAI had good products and quite a lot of traction, 900 million consumers, they won't be able to charge money for the product. Like 5% of the retail consumers were actually paying. If you look at a chart of where these users are, you know, the US is the number 2 market, India is first, and the next 3 are kind of Brazil, Indonesia, and so forth. So these are not rich consumers. You can't charge them very much money. So they had a business model that imagined that they could throw money in all directions, you know, a collaboration with Johnny Ive to have a new form factor which would supplant the iPhone, serving Sora video generation models and all this stuff, all of which is very expensive, and yet the revenue side simply wasn't there. So the burn seemed to me to be totally unsustainable, and even though Sam Altman is a magician when it comes to raising money, he wasn't going to be raising $660 billion, which is what the internally projected burn rate was for the next 5 years when you looked at the documents back in January. Now, since then, what's happened is some good news, right? Because OpenAI, I think, has recognized that it had to get the burn rate down. It's pulled out of a bunch of data center building products, you know, Stargate, all that stuff. It's cancelled Sora, the video generation model, which was a total money loser, and it's tried to impose some sort of order on the chaotic management, but it's only been kind of half successful. And in the meantime, OpenAI is squeezed between Anthropic, which is much better at the frontier enterprise applications like, you know, coding assistants and cybersecurity stuff and agentic stuff. And then on the other hand, it's squeezed by the Gemini model from Google DeepMind, which has now reached more retail consumers and is way better at monetizing from that because Google has plugged AI into its search advertising business, and that business is now doing more revenue than ever. So I just think that, you know, OpenAI is technically a good lab, but it's very hard to monetize when you have a product where there's a lot of competition and it's kind of a commodity, and they're not terribly well managed, and they've relied too much on the fake it till you make it Silicon Valley tactic of kind of weird smoke and mirrors fundraising gambits. If you look at the fundraising they did and announced earlier this year, the headline number they raised was $122 billion, which is an astronomical amount. But when you dig in, and I'm amazed the press didn't point this out more, about 2/3 of that amount was kind of promises in the future, conditional upon having a successful IPO, or payment in kind, like, you know, access to compute. The actual real money was a small share of the total fundraise, which raises the question, why announce this massive 122 billion headline number when anyone who digs into it can see it's rubbish? Well, the answer is they're trying to head fake investors into putting more money in. They're trying to persuade people they have momentum. They don't. And this news that you pointed out just recently, that they have delayed, it seems, their IPO into next year, is just the latest icing on the cake, the latest evidence that they talk a big game, but they are behind where they say they are.
Do you think that the delay of the IPO was in large part because of all of this, because perhaps Sam Altman and the company know that as soon as Wall Street actually gets like an audited review of their financial statements, then suddenly the tide will turn on this company and suddenly people will say, sure, you might have a great product, but this is not a sustainable business model. Do you think that that was the concern, that people might actually see how the company actually works?
100%. I mean, everybody remembers the WeWork story, when WeWork was this, rocket ship back in like 2019, and it went out with a prospectus to do the IPO, and people looked at it and said, this is a joke, and nobody wanted to buy the shares, and the IPO never happened. So, you can fail in going for the IPO, and OpenAI is in this very tough position where, on the one hand, it needs the IPO because it can't hope to raise enough money if it stays private. On the other hand, if it tries to do the IPO, it may not succeed, and then it's really cooked.
Just looking at how much they're spending at the moment, because we just saw the financials that were released by Ed Zitron, who's this independent journalist. He got his hands on the numbers. They generated $13 billion last year in revenue. They spent $34 billion, which means that their operating loss was $21 billion. We could talk about the net loss, which was even higher than that number, but that seems to be like a good, roughly estimate of how this business is actually doing. And you mentioned that they're stuck between, on the one hand, Gemini and then also Anthropic. Anthropic is an interesting one because we also don't know much about that business, and we know that they're unprofitable, and we know that they're in a similar business to OpenAI. And as you say, this technology is becoming increasingly commoditized. They said there were reports that maybe they were coming up on a quarter of operating profitability, but I think we probably have to take that with a grain of salt because we don't know how they're doing their accounting. My question, how does Anthropic compare to OpenAI from a business model perspective?
I think you're making a good point, and I agree with you that we don't know as much as we would do if Anthropic were a public company, or if the prospectus was public. What we do know is that Anthropic has always targeted enterprise customers, which means the type of customer that actually pay for the product. And we know that it's been ahead on stuff like coding assistance and cybersecurity AI. Not that OpenAI is bad, by the way. I mean, it's not far behind. But I think Anthropic is the cutting edge on those particular applications that enterprises are really willing to pay for. And meanwhile, Anthropic has not been sort of distracted into announcing a whole suite of retail-oriented business initiatives which came to nothing. I mean, OpenAI announced it was going to do shopping at one point, and that doesn't seem to have happened. It said it was going to do ads. I'm not sure they've got terribly far with the ads. It did generate the, Sora video model, which just was a huge money loser, whereas Anthropic never went down that path. So I think Anthropic has been way more laser focused on the part of the market that makes sense, which is the enterprise part, and just better managed. The other point I'd make is that Anthropic, amongst all the frontier labs, is known as the one where the churn in terms of the scientists is the lowest. People go there, they believe in the mission, they believe in Dario Amodei as the leader, and they tend to stay there, they don't hop around. Whereas all the other labs are subject to job hopping, and that's obviously disruptive.
I think one of the questions that is in investors' minds, especially if you're worried about the potential of an AI bubble and the potential that an AI bubble might pop, is it an OpenAI problem or is it an AI problem? Is it that OpenAI is just bad at managing their finances and they pursued all these side projects and they don't really know how to get their spending under control? Or is AI as a business model just too expensive relative to the amount of revenue that could be generated by charging customers for using ChatGPT or charging enterprises for these larger enterprise-wide AI contracts? What is your view on that debate? And just for context for our listeners, you wrote The Power Law, which is one of the most famous books ever on venture capital. And it's kind of about how venture works as a business model, where you do lose money for a number of years and then you figure it out eventually. Is AI going to be that story, or is this different?
My view is that we have an OpenAI bubble, but not a general AI bubble. So I think OpenAI, for the reasons we've discussed, is a 50-50. Look, it might work. I'm not saying I don't know that they're going to fail. I'm just saying there's a 50% chance that by next summer we'll find they couldn't really go public. In the private markets, they can't raise enough money, and they have to sort of sell themselves at some sort of discount to another company. It could be, Amazon or Microsoft or some other big company that wants an AI team, because technically OpenAI is a good team, right? Now, on the more general issue, yeah, there's debate at the moment about whether enterprise customers are having a oh my god moment where they think, these tokens are just so expensive now. I've spent the last 18 months telling my teams that they should just go out and go wild with AI and experiment and do whatever they feel like, and token max, and the more tokens you use, the better of an employee you are because you're showing that you're AI forward. And now, wow, this is expensive, and haven't seen a productivity gain yet. And so what am I doing here? I have to rationalize this. And there are lots of stories out there about how companies are imposing a sort of middle layer between the user in the enterprise and the models. And the middle layer is there to switch a query so that, if it's a simple query that I'm asking, it gets routed to a cheap, low token consumption model. And then only if it's a seriously difficult one will it go to a Fable or something expensive. So I think there's some sort of sensible rationalization about how the AI customers are spending money on this technology. But fundamentally, if you look back at what's happened since the release of ChatGPT, the clear story is this is unbelievably exciting, fast progress in the tech. I mean, when ChatGPT came out, the thing hallucinated nonstop. Then when GPT-4 was plugged in 6 months later, it basically stopped like 80% of the hallucination. Then you got very long context windows, so you could put a whole Tolstoy novel into the model and then query it. Then you got, these reasoning systems that could do math and logic, which had been impossible before. Then you get agentic systems. Then you get coding assistants. Then you get cybersecurity systems. Now you've got bespoke AI autonomous scientists emerging. This is unbelievably fast progress. So I fundamentally think that, AI as a sector, and therefore the demand for the semiconductors, the data center businesses, all these things that people worry about, I don't think that's a bubble. I think that's for real. And it's going to take a little bit of time for companies to figure out how to ration their people's use of tokens so it's sort of sensible. But basically, they're going to consume a lot of tokens.
Another data point that the bears might present that we saw last week is Meta launching their cloud business. And this would be the argument against what you're saying, which, by the way, I agree with, but I want to play devil's advocate. The very thing that Meta said they wouldn't do, they're now doing. They said that they would only launch a cloud business if they had, quote, overbuilt. These was Mark Zuckerberg's words just a few months ago. The plan was, let's build out all of these data centers, build out all of this compute capacity, because we within the Meta organization need it so desperately, because we're going to build all of these internal AI products and we're going to, AI turbocharge our business. And then they turn around and say, actually, we don't have the demand internally that we thought we did, and so we're going to sell it to someone else, and we're going to let someone else figure out how to sell an AI product and how to make that a profitable business, which seems quite bearish from a bubble perspective, because it basically says, who else but Meta would be the one to build out their own suite of AI products? If Meta can't crack it, if OpenAI is struggling to crack it, TBD on Anthropic, then who's going to crack this? Who's going to make this not just an interesting technology, but an interesting technology that makes money?
And we've seen the same with SpaceX, of course, that they also decided to sell their compute capacity to Anthropic and others because xAI, their own model, hasn't really got much of an uptake. And so they don't need all the compute they've built for their own model, therefore they're selling it to others. So you could view this as a bear signal, as you've just described, or you could view it as a bull signal, because it means that you've got some consolidation going on in the frontier model space, and less competition means better margins for the remaining participants. It means that maybe there will be more pricing power for the ones that are left standing. So I don't agree I think that's the proper reading. The proper reading is we have a rationalization of the market. If you looked at the whole sort of US ecosystem, 3-4 months ago, you had XAI trying to compete, Meta trying to compete. And then on top of that, you had the big three, Google, DeepMind, OpenAI and Anthropic. So that's 5. And that's before you count Mistral in France, Cohere in Canada, and all the Chinese models, right? That's a lot of competition. And I don't think that this thing is going to consolidate down to a winner-takes-all sort of, 2010s social media platform or something. But I think some consolidation is in order such that it looks like cloud computing, where there's kind of 3 or 4 big providers. So now we've got, 3 leaders who are still standing within the US, plus the foreign ones. That feels good to me in terms of the future business stability of the sector.
If OpenAI runs out of money, as you say, per your prediction, what do you think the outcome would be? I mean, one of the things that you wrote is that maybe it would be absorbed by another company. How does that play out if indeed what you're saying might happen does happen?
So, look, I think, we've seen lots of examples of either acquisitions or more recently acqui-hires where, you have a smallish AI company like Inflection, which Mustafa Suleyman was running, and then it got sort of sucked into Microsoft, or like Character AI, which got sucked back into Google. So there's a playbook here. Now, OpenAI is a lot bigger than either of those two, so it would be a more complex playbook. But basically, it seems to me that, the demand for AI talent and for AI products, and therefore the compute infrastructure that serves that demand, I don't think that's going away, because fundamentally I think this is useful stuff that people are going to figure out how to use productively. And so I don't know whether the whole of OpenAI gets bought by Amazon or Microsoft or some other acquirer, or alternatively there's some kind of fancy acqui-hire deal where part of OpenAI is sucked into a big company, or alternatively that there's a bit of a splintering and the technical staff at OpenAI get individually hired into other labs. Who knows, right? What I'm saying is that there's a fundamental problem with the way they're going about their business model. I think they understand that, which is why they pulled out of data center building and various other things in the last 6 months. But they've got some way to go to fix things and patch it up. And one of the lessons about how you do startups, coming out of my previous book, The Power Law, is that when you have a very high valuation, a down round is super painful. Right? They're valued in the last round at $852 billion post-money. And in the secondary market, they're trading for a lot less than that. And if they were to sort of just say, okay, we accept, we're really worth $600 billion, the hit to everybody's equity options inside OpenAI would be horrible, and they would lose people. And the hit to investors who had believed in OpenAI would be bad, and they would get pissed off. And the whole momentum machine that Sam Altman has built would really go through a convulsion. Now, it might be what you have to do to make this thing sustainable, but my point is, once you ratchet all the way up to this very high valuation, it's difficult to climb down. And that is why I think he says, why doesn't the government have 5%? Because a strategy to get out of this box that he's in is for Altman to give 5% to the government, and then the government will say, right, OpenAI is too important to fail now because we own 5% or 10% or something. And they'll do what they did with Intel, which they took a 10% stake in last year. And next thing you know, the Commerce Secretary Lutnick is calling other tech companies in the Valley saying, you're going to do a deal with Intel. You're going to bring Intel in as a partner on your next project, blah, blah, blah. And so, you've got the US government, a Trumpy US government, strong-arming other companies into giving business once they're in your corner. So I think that is what Sam Altman's strategy is here, to kind of recruit the investment banker to whom you can't say no, the US government.
Which seems like he's basically just trying to take some sort of workaround, shortcut around capitalism. And it seems like we are increasingly seeing that. Like, if you can't figure it out in the free market, then, let's just go over to Washington, walk in the White House, kiss the president's feet, and then hopefully he'll save us. And we are increasingly seeing that that is what is actually happening. We're seeing the government taking up stakes in multiple companies. We're seeing the odds that the government will take stakes in even more companies. Those are going up. They may indeed take a stake in OpenAI. Last I checked on the prediction markets, the odds of that happening were more than a third. It's possible that they would do the same with Anthropic, with Palantir, with Anduril. It makes me very upset because I think of it as cheating. I think that you're kind of cheating the game of capitalism. I'd be curious to get your views there. And then following up on that, if that actually happens, say OpenAI is running out of money and then Trump just bails them out in whatever way. We use taxpayer dollars to just continue to subsidize the business. What comes after that? Does that mean that OpenAI is fine? Does that mean that the rest of the AI industry is on shaky ground? I'm not quite sure how to even model out that potential scenario.
First of all, I think your formulation that they're cheating capitalism and, they're going to the government and doing an end round around capitalism, I think that's a good, perceptive and quite amusing insight. So thank you for that. I also, though, would say that, this is like just the way the world is going, or at least the US is going. So if you look at the number of American companies in which the US government has announced either done a deal or has announced the deal and it's yet to be consummated. A colleague of mine called Jonathan Hillman at the Council on Foreign Relations did a formal count, which just went up on the Council on Foreign Relations website. And the answer is there are 30 of them, 30 such companies since the Trump team came into power in January 2025, where there's an equity stake from the US government in a private company. So this is where the world is going. And I think this trend has been very much encouraged by the deceptive example of Intel, right? So in the case of Intel, if you look at what their performance has been since the government took a stake last August, it's been fantastic. It's been way better than the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, which is the normal index you would look at as a kind of comparable for how Intel has done. Intel, I think, is up like almost 400%. The SOX, or the Semiconductor Index in Philadelphia, that's up like 150%. So Intel has done incredibly well since the government came in. And I think people just lose sight of the fact that, it did well because you've got, the Commerce Department calling up other companies and ordering them to do business with Intel. So Intel gets a whole bunch of contracts and is like turning its game around because you've got the government behind, picking a winner. Now, it's one thing to say the government might have a justification picking a winner when we have a problem with, all of the cutting-edge semiconductors being made in Taiwan. We don't want to be reliant on an island that could be invaded by China. And so we want domestic US semiconductor manufacturing. I get that argument, right? I don't believe in extending the same argument to OpenAI, which is just one of multiple American foundation model builders. We don't need OpenAI for any strategic reason, right? So there would be no justification for picking a winner around OpenAI. So I think I think that the capitalism is sometimes justifiably twisted because you have a national security reason to do so. Backing OpenAI would not be a justifiable instance.
Well, I could imagine that the justification that would be floated is OpenAI isn't systemic to the real economy, but they'd maybe try to say that, but it's systemic to the stock market because, Microsoft's future revenues depend so heavily on OpenAI. So do, Google, Amazon, Excel, basically all the hyperscalers, Oracle. A lot of these companies are very, very important to portfolios. They are what make wealthy people wealthy in a lot of cases. And maybe the argument for Trump would be, we need to keep this thing afloat, otherwise people's stocks are going to go down. What would you make of that argument?
I'd say welcome to China. I mean, that's what the kind of thing the Chinese government would do, is prop up the stock market with government intervention of that sort. I mean, look, in the United States, when the Federal Reserve operates a policy that looks like it might be about stabilizing the stock market, people freak out and say, well, that's a Fed put. And, that creates bubbles, more bubbles in the future. And, capitalism doesn't work unless there's real risk involved. And that's the Fed. If you have, like, bunch of political types in Washington, the Commerce Department and so forth, picking winners and distorting outcomes in the market, you don't have a market anymore. It's not a free market. Your point about this is an end run around, capitalism, or to say the same point differently, this is an end run against the notion of a fair, level playing field on which different companies compete fairly, and then the most efficient ones win. That's what we're supposed to believe in as the wellspring of efficiency in American capitalism. Well, if you start de-leveling the playing field by picking OpenAI as a winner, you've just trashed that.
We'll be right back after the break. And if you're enjoying the show so far, send it to a friend, and please follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Support for the show comes from Delete Me. The internet makes it easy for scammers, stalkers, and hackers to do their thing. That's just a fact. But it's important to remember that there are ways to protect yourself. That starts with protecting your data, and Delete Me can help you do just that. Delete Me does all the hard work to wipe your personal information from data broker websites. It was named the top pick for data removal services by Wirecutter, and our producer, Jennifer Sanchez, has tried Delete Me. She was surprised to find out how much personal information was actually already out there, but Delete Me made it very easy for her to clean it up. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/profg and use promo code PROFG at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/profg and enter code PROFG at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/profg, code PROFG. We're back with Prof G Markets. This is a good segue into China, which is a topic that you also wrote about recently. The title of your piece was, quote, "I went to China to see its progress on AI. We can't beat it." That was in the New York Times recently, your op-ed. What did you learn about Chinese progress on AI, and why do you think that we can't beat it?
We haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm going to mention it now because you've given me the excuse. So I published a book this year called The Infinity Machine about Demis Hassabis. And
I was going to get to it.
but there you are.
I'm glad you mentioned it.
Go read The Infinity Machine, folks. But no, seriously, the thing about China is it does everything faster. And so they published, although they got my manuscript last, and then they had to translate it into Chinese, and then they wanted photographs and other embellishments. They produced, in a way, a more complex product, but they actually published it before Penguin Press in the United States or any of the other deals I had in other countries. So I go to China right at the beginning of my book tour. I spent 8 days, going to 4 different cities, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, talking to both computer scientists at the private labs like, Huawei and Ant Group and so forth, and then also talking to academic computer scientists from universities. And what struck me about these guys is that, first of all, they talk about safety. They just bring it up. The notion, which I've heard from friends in Washington, that the Chinese don't give a damn about AI safety is just not true. They do talk about safety. Now, I'm not claiming that the government's policy is to pursue safety, or that the majority view in China is that they want safety. China is like the US. China has some accelerationists and some people who want to go slower because they're worried about the safety issue. That's the same as the US. So neither side is going to de-escalate and start going slower unless the other one does as well. But what I'm saying is, it's to caricature China as like only accelerationist 100%, that's just wrong. And so there is scope to talk to them about safety, and maybe we'll come on to that. But the other thing which I observed is that China is very good and very focused on applications. And so if you go to a company like, Hikvision, which is under US sanctions. And it's kind of a out-of-body sort of double-take experience when you go there, because on the one hand, it feels like an American tech company. I love tech companies. They're kind of all about building cool things and making the world better. I kind of buy that. I drink that Kool-Aid. I kind of believe in it. I like technology, right? So I see these people trying to build cool technology, and they show me stuff like, for example, there is an AI kind of scanning camera thing, and you point it at some water and you get a reading on the pollution count in the water. And because they've created that, guess what? There is an internal market in water pollution reduction between different Chinese cities. So if you're the downstream city, you will pay the upstream city to reduce the pollution in the water that's going to come downstream to you. And so you can do pollution reduction when you can measure the pollution. And this is what they're doing at this company. This is what they're building. But they're also under sanctions, these guys, by the US, because the US says, and historically this was actually true, that they're building other kinds of cameras which are good for surveillance of civilians and so forth in Xinjiang and whatever. So they're both bad guys and they're cool guys. It's a difficult thing to figure out. But whatever they think, whether they are bad or cool, they ain't going away. These guys are for real. They are building cool technology. You go to Huawei, they've got application after application. Here is our special, AI to service the bullet train between Shanghai and Beijing every evening. We used to have human technicians, mechanics, who would go under the train and make sure it's all fine. Now we just have AI cameras and a couple of robots, and they fix the train for you. They are doing this. We're not stopping them. We have imposed chip export controls on China to try to hold them back. It hasn't worked. These guys are moving ahead. And the latest thing was, you probably saw, is this model from a group called Zhipu in China, which isn't quite as good as Mythos from Anthropic, but it's pretty close. So we are kidding ourselves if we kind of assume away the reality of China being a technology superpower. And we need to, on the contrary, get our heads out of the ostrich position in the sand and start talking to China about what happens when they have a Mythos-level model which could hack every single bank in the global financial system and wreak havoc. We need to persuade them not to release it on an open source, open weight basis, because then any criminal can do it and there won't be an off switch.
What is your view then on AI policy with China? Obviously the big debate is, should we have these export controls? Should we sell chips to China? Are we selling weapons to our enemy? Or do we need to sell dumber chips, basically dumber weapons to the enemy? Or should we not have these export controls at all? I mean, do you think that we should have a policy, or is the path forward more of a method of diplomacy?
I believe in American power, first of all. I work at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and we do geopolitics all day long, and I believe that US power is generally a force for good. So I would rather that the Chinese were behind on AI, okay? And so to the extent that a chip export ban helps us to be ahead, I support it. And indeed, when it was first announced in 2022, I wrote a massive long essay in the Washington Post about why this was a good idea. But the reason I've had my doubts recently is that I look at the results and I'm not seeing that Chinese models are that far behind. And in the meantime, because they're not far behind, I think we have to reckon with the reality that they are building models which are going to destabilize the global cyber system. And unless we persuade them not to release them on an open weight basis, which is what they're doing at the moment, we have serious trouble on our hands. Like, everything in cyberspace will be destabilized. And we need a policy to deal with this proliferation risk. And I would be willing, I'm in favor of the chip export ban if we could have it for free and there'd be no downside. But if the effect of having chip export controls is that we can't talk to them about an agreement on not doing open weight Mythos, then I'm willing to trade a bit on the chip export ban.
Just looking at some of how these models have affected the ecosystem, I mean, something we were saying earlier, in the US, you've got Anthropic, you've got OpenAI, you've got Gemini. Those are kind of the heavyweights in the US right now. But it does seem that as pricing becomes more of an issue, companies are more interested in cheaper models, which usually means Chinese models. And indeed, that is exactly what we're seeing when we look at Open Router, which is basically a tracks developer marketplace for AI models. Chinese models went from less than a third of developer traffic in late 2025 to 60% by mid-2026. There are some American companies that have started using Chinese models: Cursor, Airbnb, Shopify, Uber. Microsoft is currently testing DeepSeek. What do you make of this transition over to the Chinese models, specifically the cheap Chinese models, and what role does that play in potentially the policy discussion?
Well, I mean, it shows you that they make good models that serious American companies are thinking of using. And so that's another argument for why you can't just pretend that China can be beaten and that's the end of it. And these guys are for real, and we have to work with them, not just against them. Now, I think it's useful to just, for a moment, think through the lens of the Cold War, where when there were nuclear weapons in the Cold War, there were two kinds of big risk, right? One was a nuclear conflagration between the Soviet Union and the United States. And the way we prevented that was through mutually assured destruction, basically close to parity in the power of the two arsenals, and therefore deterrence. On the other hand, there was a different category of risk from nuclear weapons, which was the proliferation of these systems to rogue states or terrorists and so forth. And we dealt with that with a separate mechanism, which was the non-proliferation regime. Now, the point is, we were both competing with Russia, having an arms race with Russia, having a Cuban Missile Crisis with Russia, being told by the Russians at the United Nations, "We will bury you," as Khrushchev said when he banged his shoe on the table. So there was deadly serious competition between the two superpowers, but at the same time there was cooperation on a non-proliferation agreement. And the way I see the future with AI is that we'll do the same. We will have inevitable competition between China and the US, but we'll also, I hope, have collaboration, because the proliferation risk is too awful to contemplate unless you have some collaboration.
It seems, though, that what they're doing is basically stealing what we have. People are calling it distillation. And you wrote about this, and your definition of distillation, quote, "Every time a US lab produces a cutting-edge model, Chinese rivals quickly reverse engineer its capabilities and build a copycat version. The follower has the advantage." And when I look at companies are switching to Chinese models because Chinese models are cheaper. And as you say, maybe they'll use the more